Soon and very soon, we are going to see the Hosh. Soon and very soon, we are going to eat the curry. No more lying then, we are going to see the Hosh. Hallelujah, ooya booya, we are going to see the Hosh. Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. Yesterday, Witness A gave testimony at the Ndlala Commission, and he gave testimony which actually provided clarity, evidence on several elements relating to Katiso Molefe, the Transnet tender, the murder of Armand Swart, which occurred last year on the 17th of April, 2024. What is also explosive were the revelations which exposed the possible involvement of a certain gentleman known as Tamin Dala. He's a popular, notorious, controversial businessman in South Africa, and his White House on the Hill, this 12th on Hillel hotel, boutique hotel, where the police actually had a party, several parties, party after party, right? And it suggested that those parties were being used to try to soften up the police, try to see if they were going to be amenable to changing their disposition towards this investigation. Tamin Dala, at one point, was married to a famous celebrity, Lerato Kganyago. And they both seem to have had ownership or have ownership of this White House on the Hill, the hotel. There's a White House in Washington, and there's a White House on Hillel. And that one also seems to be part of the mix, part of the currying of the Hosh Kari. Another Hosh Kari mama has now been dragged into the story. And what is also interesting is that since yesterday, the website of the hotel has been taken down. It's gone. I tried to find it on the Wayback Machine. It kept reloading, couldn't find it. So the website is gone, but the Instagram was still there at the time of recording. I took some screen records as well. If you go to the Instagram of the hotel or Tamin Dala's places or his business entities, you will see that there are many Hosh Kari mamas who have been promoting the hotel, attending his events. I even saw Kelly Khumalo there in one of the videos. When you begin to connect the dots, Sibia, Khumalo, Meiwa, and then now, Kelly Khumalo, who knows? Who knows where all of this goes or how deep the rabbit hole goes? So that was an interesting element, and social media is trying to speculate and solve that problem. The first part of the Witness A testimony, back to the testimony now, covered how the murder was planned and executed. Witness A showed how Katiso Molefe and others were trying to narrow down who the targets were, in terms of their targets, in this case being the whistleblowers who had exposed the Hosh Kari behavior of that particular Transnet tender. So the way it happened was as follows. There was a company called the SKK Group. It got a tender from Transnet. The son of Katiso Molefe, who's actually a fugitive from the law right now, Ndlala Molefe, was at some point working at Transnet. So Katiso Molefe wins the tender. And from what I can see, it looks like his son was the inside man. They also seem to be using romantic relationships, arrangements to get information, because at some point in the text that were displayed, one of the people was saying, "My love, can you tell me who the targets are at QTech?" or something to that effect. So there's a bit of romance fraud happening here. And if you think about also, Vusi the cat Matlala Wetsa Manyala, he also uses his romantic entanglements, his wives, his partners to register companies and to be involved in the behavior that he is participating with. So this SK Group was buying from QTech, which is the company which was manufacturing these springs on behalf of Transnet. They were operating as a middleman. And it was discovered that the SKK Group was inflating prices way higher than the ones that they were receiving from QTech. And this is how the Hosh Kari behavior destroys the system, because somebody gets a contract from the government because of their tactics and relationships, right? Whether it's Hangwani Maumela, Katiso Molefe, whatever the case may be, they then deliver an overpriced product, sometimes an inferior product, sometimes no product at all. And then the public is the one that ends up losing out, because either the state-owned enterprise overpays or the state-owned enterprise has no quality service or deliverables that they can speak to. And then what that looks like is now you have capacity constraints in Tembisa Hospital. They cannot hire as many people as they would have liked to hire. So that's how things play out. So what should have been a 25,000 Rand purchase became a tender of 1.2 million. That's a 4,650% increase on the price from QTech. If QTech had received this tender directly, Transnet would have saved a lot of money long term. And if you think about how many people are in the system who are vendors or tenderpreneurs, whatever you want to call them, for the various state-owned enterprises, and then you were to break down how much overcharging is happening, you would find that across the board, the problem in South Africa isn't actually that the budget is not enough. The problem is that the budget is looted on the way to the ground. And by the time the rand which was deployed to the ground lands on the ground, it's a few cents, if any. Right? Some of the people are keeping all of the money, buying Lamborghinis, as you've seen, Ferraris, whatever the case may be. So an I-20 with clone number plates was scouting the area. It appears to be the vehicle that was used. A white Mercedes Viano was also scouting the area. A silver Mercedes-Benz E200 scouting the area next to QTech as they were plotting the murder. Two of these cars ended up being linked to the accused, one through his daughter and the other directly to Michael Puletau. This was the daughter of Mabusela. So these guys were scouting the area, they were using their vehicles, then the vehicle itself was found. One of the vehicles, the Viano. You know, being a cop must be nice. You are riding around in a Viano. Hey, Nkolaling Shuteni, in a Viano. So Michael Puletau was riding around in a Viano. He went with that Viano to visit, what's his name? Katiso Molefe. From everything that was presented by the investigating officer, in this case, witness A, you could tell that there was a nexus between Katiso Molefe, Michael Puletau, Kikana, Mabusela, all of them. You could tell. There was an attempt to hide the bullet casings, but the suspects were caught before they could dispose of them. They were caught about 72 kilometers away from Vereeniging in Bramley on Wednesday after the police had followed up on information. Then all of the dots connected because of the cell phones which were found, the burner phones which were found, the text messages which were found, and also the location history of the vehicles, the video footage of the vehicles in various locations. Not only was this premeditated murder, it was also conspiracy to commit murder in the furtherance of fraud. And that's going to matter later when we talk about bail. Remember that it's not only premeditated murder because there was a plan to take out targets, but also this was in pursuance of fraud. Because what was happening with the Transnet tender was effectively some form of fraud. Now, in all of this, let's talk about the bail stuff. It's important. Listening to the testimony of witness A, I'm convinced that Katiso Molefe getting bail was the wrong decision and is something that would be overturned if it was appealed. I'm actually surprised, and it's odd that the NPA did not appeal this decision, considering the public interest in the matter, the nature of the allegations, and considering what we all know about the connections between the hitmen and Katiso Molefe. And now we've seen witness A give us an overview with detailed evidence of all of the interconnections. You know, Katiso Molefe taking calls, going to, Katiso Molefe calling Michael Puletau going to Katiso Molefe's house, the messages which were sent on the day of the murder, the cars circulating QTech. Those three officers or individuals did not have to be there at that particular time. There's no reason why they would have been outside QTech except for doing the activities which they were doing. Plus, they were found with the casings, the guns were recovered. We know that these allegations are strong and the evidence against the accused is actually compelling, right? Now, let's talk about bail. There are two competing interests in the granting of bail. And before I go on, I'm relying on these two textbooks for those of you who'd like to get more information on this. Criminal Law by Snyman and also the Criminal Procedure Handbook, the 11th edition. And the editor here is Jobert. So this is what I'm relying on. And I did go to Wits University, do a law degree. I got my LLB at Wits University. So these textbooks, my memory, and what they taught me at school, that's what I'm trying to use to give you this information. So there are two competing interests. Number one is the presumption of innocence, which entitles one to liberty. And then the other side is the interest of justice, which seeks to make sure that somebody on the outside does not derail the investigation while they are on the outside. So on the one hand, you've got presumption of innocence. We can't just presume you're guilty. But on the other hand, we can't just let you out if we think that you're going to mess up the investigation. And there's a tension, right? So we have to keep that in mind. So there are different schedules of offenses which deal with bail differently and create different presumptions around whether or not you will get bail. For Schedule 1 offenses, you are likely to get bail. For Schedule 5 and 6 offenses, you're not likely to get bail. Now, in the Vusi Matlala matter, there was a debate about what schedule of offenses is he in, 5 or 6, and it's important to understand that. Now, let me just take you through some of the legislation. Now, the Criminal Procedure Act is the relevant act which you need to be aware of. Section 60.1 says the following: an accused who is in custody in respect of an offense shall be entitled to be released on bail at any stage preceding his or her conviction in respect of such offense, if the court is satisfied that the interest of justice so permit. So you're likely to get bail in Schedule 1 types of offenses, right? Now, it says the following at 60.11, right? Section 60.11. Notwithstanding any provision of this act, where an accused is charged with an offense referred to in Schedule 6, the court shall order that the accused be detained in custody or she is dealt with in accordance with the law, unless the accused, having been given a reasonable opportunity to do so, adduces evidence which satisfies the court that exceptional circumstances exist which, in the interest of justice, permits his or her release, right? So Michael Puletau, for instance, said that he had diabetes and then he got bail, and then there was all of that intimidation and everything that was discussed by witness A. That wouldn't qualify as an exceptional circumstance, because prisons have hospitals. They know how to deal with diabetes, and many patients within many diabetes suffering inmates have been treated and are being treated within the system. Diabetes is a very common disease in South Africa, and it's not exceptional. It's not something that needs you to go to Sweden or Norway for a surgery or anything to that effect. Then it says, same section 60.11, right? It says, notwithstanding any provision of this act, when accused is charged with an offense referred to in Schedule 5, but not in Schedule 6, the court shall order that the accused be detained in custody until he or she is dealt with in accordance with the law, unless the accused, having been given a reasonable opportunity to do so, adduces evidence which satisfies the court that the interests of justice permit his or her release. So Schedule 6 has exceptional circumstances being the criteria upon which you get your bail, and Schedule 5 has interests of justice. So when you look at these schedules, right, what are Schedule 5 offenses? I'm going to tell you what the Criminal Procedure Handbook says and what the CPA says, right? So these include crimes such as armed robbery, drug trafficking, rape, and theft involving significant harm or violence. Any offense also includes any offense relating to the dealing in or smuggling of ammunition, firearms, explosive or armaments, or the possession of automatic or semi-automatic firearms, explosives or armaments. It also includes fraud involving amounts over 500,000. It also includes fraud involving amounts more than 100,000 rands, if it is alleged that the offense was committed by a person or group of persons, a syndicate or enterprise acting in the execution or furtherance of a common purpose or conspiracy. So you can see that there are different criteria based on individual versus syndicate, right? For Schedule 5 offenses, bail is presumed to be denied unless the accused can show strong evidence that their release will not endanger the public or interfere with the investigation. That part of interfering with the investigation is important because we just heard that there were issues of tampering. Witness A spoke about issues of tampering. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So sentences for Schedule 5 offenses typically range from several years to decades in prison. Now let's talk about Schedule 6. Offenses in Schedule 6 are considered to be the most severe. This includes crimes like premeditated murder, attempted murder, repeated sexual assault. If you think about other crimes that are in this category, it includes where the death of a victim was committed by a group of persons or syndicate acting in the execution or the furtherance of a purpose or conspiracy. Common purpose or conspiracy. Right, let me read that again. It includes where the death of the victim was committed by a group of persons or a syndicate acting in the execution of a furtherance of a common purpose or conspiracy. Penalties are much harsher here. They include life imprisonment for Schedule 6 offenses, and the presumption against granting bail for Schedule 6 offenses is often stronger, with release granted only under exceptional circumstances. I do not think that Katiso Molefe presented exceptional circumstances. I do not think that he showed also that, there was interest in justice in terms of him being released. That's my view. If you think about all of the tampering, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence right now which links Katiso Molefe to the murder of Armand Swart. He was sending text messages to the alleged assassins before the murder, and with details of the company. He was visited by the alleged assassins before the hit. He was forwarded pictures of the targets of the whistleblower, the mistaken identity case there, because it wasn't actually the whistleblower. There was also a trail of payments from Katiso Molefe to the accused and relatives of the accused. I think that in this instance, considering also that there was an attempt to tamper, I wouldn't have granted him bail. And there's something that I want to just mention, word of the day, and that's recidivism, right? Recidivism is the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend. And between 86% and 94% of convicted criminals reoffend after leaving prison, meaning that the relevant pattern of criminal behavior persists. Recidivism is measured only in terms of convicted criminals. I think that we need to think broadly about situations where people who are committing repeat offenses are actually out on bail. We've been hearing more and more that while people were out on bail, they committed more of the very same crime that they're charged with. And considering the gaps in policing in South Africa, there may very well need to be an amendment to the Criminal Procedure Act for certain groups of people who are actually implicated in this stuff to actually have a hard presumption against bail being granted. I know there's a tension between presumption of innocence and also the interest of justice. But let's consider earlier this year the case of Lerato Mongale, right? She was murdered by Philangenkosi Makhanya. And Philangenkosi Makhanya was part of a syndicate which consisted of two other individuals. At the time of the murder, two of the suspects were out on bail. They were out on bail, Mr. Makhanya and Mr. Mtimkulu. They were arrested earlier for kidnapping and robbing a woman in KwaZulu-Natal using exactly the same vehicle which Lerato was seen entering, with the one she was last seen in. So if you think about it, they were on bail at the time when the crime occurred, a crime that they were repeating, right? Because this was in part the same modus operandi, kidnapping, robbing a woman, and then it ended up in murder. So it actually escalated. But I think we must consider seriously these kind of instances where you have syndicates operating out on bail and then recommitting the same crimes. That is a form of recidivism in and of itself that I don't think there's enough literature on and enough research on. But I think if we are seeing high levels of recidivism in the normal prison population when released, we should also assume that those stats extend also to people who are out on bail for these type of crimes. I think it's fair to consider that. Going back to witness A, there was a discussion of attempts to tamper with the investigation from within the police. And this is where it got really spicy in terms of not only was there this very brazen murder, which in and of itself is scandalous. Then there was also the cover-up, which I think shows the extent of the Hosh Kari behavior throughout the system, right? There was a discussion of intimidation on the day when Michael Puletau was arrested, right? The cops showed up from Johannesburg Central Police Station. Apparently, that's where they were from. The investigating officers were followed after the appearance at the magistrate courts, and there were some attempts to drive them off the road. That is something quite significant. Then after the fact, then there was this
notable figure who's mentioned, who seemed to be trying to suggest that bribes were available or that this issue would be dealt with one way or another. And that was General Richard Shibiri, not Bushiri, Shibiri. So he is a 57-year-old male senior police officer. He rose through the ranks of the South African Police Service to become a well-known senior officer and is one of the senior police working on organized crime. He oversees, interacts closely with the National Organized Crime Unit and their related task teams. In that capacity, he would have been responsible for strategic direction, oversight, interagency liaison, and when required, for briefing investigating teams and other senior officers. So witness A says they get called to have a meeting with Shibiri. And when they go to that meeting, he tells them that the people who are involved in this are quite powerful, that there are 3 envelopes. And this seems to be a suggestion that there are possible bribes to influence bail decisions for suspects in this particular matter. He says there's a brown envelope, not brown envelope, mukhotsi. There's a brown envelope for the magistrate, one for the prosecutor, one for the investigating officer. Right? So that's what he says. And then he also mentioned something about Mswati. General Shibiri mentioned that these people who were accused were connected to this individual who's identified as Mswati. Now, Mswati is the nickname of the deceased taxi boss, Jonathan Zanemvula Msibi, who died in January on the 7th of 2024. So this was after what was reported to be a short illness. Now, Mswati is interesting because he was a notorious and prominent figure in the South African taxi industry with a reputation for violence. So Mswati was the former president of the South African Local and Long Distance Taxi and Buses Association and also served as the director for the Taxi Scrapping Administrator. Now, this Mswati connection ties to Vusi Ndlala, right? Vusi the cat Ndlala Wetsamanyala. 9 lives which have run out now, 0 lives. Right, because maybe you will have one more if he gets bail, and he may. You never know. You never know if there are envelopes being prepared. So, Ndlala and Josie Banyoni, that's where the Mswati connection seems to tie in. One of the cases that Vusi Ndlala is facing is the attempted murder of Josie Banyoni, who is also a taxi boss, and this is where it seems there are interconnections. Now, Josie Banyoni is or was the executive president of the South African Local Long Distance Taxi and Bus Association. Mr. Sibanyoni has been in the taxi industry for quite a while. He's been in the leadership circles of various taxi associations, the South African Black Taxi Association 95, South African Long Distance Taxi Association, Santaco, and his business interests apparently now have expanded to minibus taxis, trucks, property, mining, IT, construction. He started in Mpumalanga, then he rose his way through the ranks. I think his business interests are mostly now in Mpumalanga and Tshwane. It may very well be that the Big 5 cartel is connected to some key figures in the taxi industry. And if you look at this matter of Josie Banyoni, the prosecutor said that, going back now to the Josie Banyoni case itself, the prosecutor in that case said Josie Banyoni was shot on the 10th of August 2022 outside the Centurion Golf Estate in Pretoria. Now, the prosecutor said Josie Banyoni had animosity with Mswati, right? And Ndlala, Vusi the cat Ndlala, was providing Mswati with protection services through his private security company, Cat VIP. That's the same company that Hangwani Morgan Maumela was also a director of. So whenever you hear Cat VIP, you must remember Hangwani was also a director there. And also Vusi Ndlala met Pegicele at Hangwani's property. So those two are interconnected, right? So the state prosecutor said that Vusi Ndlala arranged for a white BMW vehicle which was used by the gunman in Sibanyoni's shooting to be stored at his girlfriend's residence. The prosecutor didn't mention the girlfriend's name at the time of the shooting. However, at that time, Vusi Ndlala was dating Tebogo Tobejane, that Hosh Kari mama that the famous one. You see, wherever there is Hosh, there's a Hosh Kari mama. You see that? You see? Hey, so anyway, one of the cases that Vusi is facing is this case. So are you beginning to see the interconnections? There are interconnections all over the place with this. Now, the witness said that these remarks left them feeling baited, compromised, it raised fear that the evidence or the process might be influenced or tampered with. And I think they were justified to have those viewpoints if you consider what they were talking about. Now, beyond the 3 envelopes remark, Witness A also told the commission that investigators were warned to look after themselves because those suspects were connected to the dangerous figures that I've already told you about. And this already heightened their concerns. And at some point, there was a whole threat risk assessment which was done. Then another major allegation which came up was the issue of forensic evidence. Now, Witness A reported that ballistic reports linking cartridges and firearms across the scenes were missing, they were altered, and they required rewriting. And then they ended up taking them to KZN for reassessment, right? That's something that is worrying when there's tampering of this particular nature. It should definitely be worrying people because it seemed to the Witness A that there was tampering. And at some point, there was not even mention of the cartridges in one of the reports which required rewriting. And then at some point, he says they got a request to hand over the Swart docket to the cold case unit. They had been keeping the docket on them in the car as they were driving around. They didn't even leave it in the police station where it was supposed to be stored because it appeared there were attempts to get a hold of the docket, and the cold case unit was not justified to do so according to Witness A. It was nowhere close to being a cold case. Then comes the house on the hill, the White House, local White House, not the Washington White House, Johannesburg White House. The house on the hill was part of end of the day. I got you. The dissection has your back. So I'll see you later for the next episode. Meantime, subscribe, turn on your notifications. Catch you later.